I'd like to bring up our panel. As you can see, this one is a no-hold-barred exchange. First of all, Justice Malala, where are you? We didn't have a chance to meet beforehand. You need... Good to see you. I'd like you, sir, to sit there. Just there. Chris, you want to sit next to Tony Leon? Fine. You can see how this is going to be. Next, Chris Gibbons. Chris, come on up.
Thank you.
Where would you like to sit? Why don't you choose where you want to sit? Because clearly I'm not in charge. David Silk is here as well, the analyst. Where are you, David? Come on up. Right, just pull your chair slightly over so make it a bit more rounded. There we are. Oh, that's perfect. Over there. Now, before we begin, I want a hands up. Maybe not just because of what we've just heard from Tony. Hands up, how many of you in this room at this moment are optimistic about South Africa's future? Hands up, those of you who are optimistic. All right, let's reverse that question. How many of you are pessimistic about the 12 months ahead in South Africa's future? How many of you are just lying cheats and wouldn't put your hand up even if you admitted it? Right, we will take questions. I'm going to start with you. Which one should we start with? Let's start with you, Justice Malala. What you've just heard from Tony Leon. And let's start with the subject everybody wants to talk about, Guptagate. Come on, you do. You want to hear this panel's view on Guptagate.
Well,
go on.
What I liked, that lady over there, when you said, who's feeling optimistic about South Africa? She went, and then she went, and then she went like this, like everyone else. I think when you think about Guptagate, I think that response is exactly it. It's
what?
It's wow. You know, Tony paints this fantastic picture of a country that has massive problems and yet can do certain things to turn things around. Okay, so and you feel wow, fantastic. Then you think about all these problems that Tony speaks about.
Stick to Guptagate.
I want to come to it.
What is the serious? Oh, look, if you're not going to go there, what's the seriousness of it?
There are two issues. One is leadership, the other is accountability. Where's the leadership to deal with this? Because we've passed the 7 days when the report is supposed to be out. It's not out. Where's the accountability? There's no accountability. So Tony speaks very nice things, but that response says, oh, where's the accountability? I would like to see some heads roll, and I'm not seeing them.
You want to see heads roll?
You're not going to see hands on, you're not going to see heads roll, because this is the way it's been in this country for how many years? Since 1994, since the ANC came to power. All roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to Rome and to President Jacob Zuma.
Now, we are not going to turn this into a barrage attack on the President of the Republic.
Why not?
Because we invited them to come and they wouldn't come. Incidentally, that is true. We did invite the government to send somebody to join our panel, and they declined. What's the importance of Guptagate?
The fact that when I opened my room door and looked in the closet, there was a series of condoms in my room in the palace left over, which no doubt was a relic from the wedding. Perhaps,
well, I hope they weren't used.
Certainly a very well-appointed room in the hotel.
Sorry?
It's a very well-appointed room in the hotel. It's not just sample shampoos and shower caps. Look, the significance to me, Richard, is that it does weaken President Zuma's standing. A standing that received tremendous acclaim, in a sense, at Mangaung last year, 3/4 of the delegates of the ANC supporting Jacob Zuma. But we've seen an overall weakening of his position despite his apparent strength within his own political party.
Why, Tony, and yet nobody here believes that he's not going to be re-elected. So what is the significance of this weakening?
Well, we'll see over the next year. We can't know from here. But let me just make one point about it, which I do think Guptagate brought to the surface. I think there is a big difference, and it's not an original thought, between being pro-business and pro-market. And I think actually the government, although it doesn't get note for this, is actually very pro-business. And the Guptas are part of that circle of business influence.
Isn't that a bit like saying, isn't that a bit like saying Dracula's running the blood bank?
But being
But he knows how to do it very well.
But being pro-market means creating clear rules of transparency, access for all players, and so on. And that's what you don't see with the Gupta influence, which perhaps you see in other places. Now, I don't know the Guptas. I didn't go and fundraise from them when I was leading the party. My successor did. But I know what it takes, incidentally. Let me say, I'm the one person...
Are you looking for an introduction?
Oh, well, okay. The great food I
Is there anybody here who can perhaps introduce Tony?
I know what it takes to fund political parties, and whether you're opposition or government. And sometimes you've got to go and see some very strange people to keep your show on the road. So and then not just all the SAPOA delegates either, let me hasten to add. So that's one. I think it's a question, though, of does money buy you undue influence?
Yes, we know the answer to that. You're not a naive
Well,
virgin.
that's what Guptagate brings to the surface.
President Zuma has said as much publicly. He said if you support the ANC, your business will prosper. That's absolutely unambiguous. The Guptas have got the message. They've got it in spades.
No, you know, Rich, I mean, I think the issue raises an important point more broadly than just the Guptas. To me, the issue in South Africa really is a divergence within the ruling party about the issue of business, whether business is seen as an impediment or whether business is embraced by the ruling party. There's an ideological divide within the ruling party. And I think that divide is going to play itself out over the course of the next number of years. We're going to see a divide politically on that issue.
When you say that, David, you're suggesting a shift away from the, for want of a better word, market economics, capitalist structures towards something more socialist or more government interventionist.
I'm simply saying that I think there
Well,
are
what I'm
divergent opinions within the ruling alliance, and there are some who would absolutely go with what you are saying. COSATU have said the main problem with South Africa is capitalism. That's what they said last week.
Although,
I just think this is nothing new. If you look at what happened with the gear policy in the 2000, President Mbeki was absolutely pilloried, and then it all went haywire in 2007 at the Polokwane conference. I think the key question is whether the political leadership we have today is capable of dealing with the problems that Tony outlined in his speech today. One, look at what's happening just a few kilometers from here with the Marikana issues. The sentiment internationally is, I can't do business in South Africa. Look at the labor problems, they can't solve them. Can this leadership of the ANC and President Zuma solve these problems? I don't think so. If you look at, you mentioned Cyril Ramaphosa, he's a shareholder. On May 1, he told workers that, no, I want the NUM back. The same workers, his workers, are saying we want the NUM out of there.
I think Justice is putting his finger on what I've written an editorial in my magazine. This is the single biggest problem facing South Africa. It's the non-alignment of business and government. When a delegation from China or from Brazil gets off the plane, the politicians and the business people are pointing in the same direction. The business people and the politicians in South Africa are going head to head. Do you need to leave the room?
I think it was all the talk about what was going on in his room.
The single biggest challenge, everyone who put their hand up when you asked that question, Richard, the single biggest challenge is what are you doing to align your businesses with government so that you're both pointing in the same direction?
Hang on, government aligns with business, not business with government, surely.
Two-way street.
On the contrary.
Two-way street.
On the contrary. Government has to align with business, not the other way around.
In this country, you're wrong. You've got to find each other. Think of the history, the post-colonial history, all of that stuff. It's a two-way street.
I don't think it really matters much anymore in our case.
I'm sorry, it doesn't matter anymore.
It would be nice to just have one voice, whichever way it goes. At the moment, you don't have it. Think about it. FNB says something, Nedbank says something, all the major banks, or whatever, one of you stands up today, gives a speech that in any way makes Gwede Mantashe unhappy. I'm telling you, South Africa is going to be, it will be you business people, this and that and that. It's not, it's
All right,
just...
so how come the Chinese are getting it right, the Brazilians are getting it right, and so many other countries? How can they do it and we don't?
Maybe the leadership problem is not just political, it's also where is business leadership today? How could we, in the
why it's a two-way
1990s,
street.
get business
All
to be aligned with the
Tony.
vision of the country, and we don't have that today?
I agree with Justice, Richard. Look, and if I might just internationalize it to your front or backyard,
Oh, yeah.
the EU. What we're seeing in Europe...
Let's not talk about
No,
private
but
grief.
for one very good reason.
Please.
The EU was designed, you know, for success and not for failure. We now see some big failures, and we find that the EU or the Eurozone is perhaps not fit for purpose in a situation of crisis. Equally in South Africa in 1994, when we built all these institutions, we have them all, incidentally, to mediate government, labor, and all these other problems. We thought we'd designed sort of fail-safe, foolproof mechanisms. Clearly, we haven't. I mean, we designed a system for big unions, big business, and to participate. It doesn't work anymore. So, in a sense, while for the last 19 years or so, going back to 1990, we built all these mechanisms, maybe those mechanisms have now been stress tested and need to be rethought. I don't have the time or you certainly don't have the interest of me to go through how they can be rethought, but perhaps we need, in some areas, to go back and look afresh.
On that point, there is an election next year. David, what do you fear will happen in this electoral process?
No, I don't have a fear about the electoral process. I think we are a maturing democracy, and I think that we are more competitive, and I agree entirely with what Tony said. We are more politically competitive than ever before. It's easier for opposition to maneuver and to perform in South Africa than ever before, and there are more opposition players, personalities in our body politic, and I think that's positive for us to 2014.
Justice?
I do have a fear. My fear is this. 23 million people in 2009, 23 million people registered to vote. Only 17 million turned up. Now, 11 million of those people voted for the ANC. My thing is, as disillusionment sets in South Africa, instead of 5 million staying away, there'll be 6 million or 7 million. And that, if you think about it, you've been talking about
drag
political
them.
parties.
I mean, you can't
But
drag
hold
them.
on. The thing is this, the ANC has money like nobody's business. Chancellor House, whichever you mention, the Guptas or whoever it may be, channeling money into the ANC, they can get people out into their homes. The opposition, despite that delicious dinner at the Gupta house, doesn't have as much money. So what I'm saying to you
got a smaller
is
check.
basically the fear is that many of you will say, oh no, I will not vote for this. Or many of you will say, oh no, you know, I've always voted ANC, I'm thinking about it, and don't pitch up on the day. And that will be a big, big problem for this democracy because you're going to entrench something that you don't particularly like. So if there's any success for me in South Africa, is that we voted 94, 99, 2004, but you know.
What happens next year at the election? Bumpy landing, bit of violence, unions will stir the pot, communists will stir the pot. What's really important is what happens after the election. ANC is re-elected, no doubt about that, but with a reduced majority. Paranoia grips the cabinet. How do we prevent losing our majority in 2019? So the 5 years immediately after this next election become repressive, they become more state controlling, they become more state redistributive, land reform, all the stuff Tony was talking about, and we edge further down that dirt track towards a failed state. The next 5 years are going to be very difficult.
You're shaking your head.
I don't have the fear that that's the predictable scenario. I think it's an option. But I think that what we may well see following 2014 is a concern amongst the ruling party about a loss of a 51% majority in 2019 or 2024 for that matter.
Is
But
that,
I think
is that loss, for those of us looking from outside, looking in, is that loss of majority an inevitability at some date?
It's not an inevitability. I think that there is a slow trajectory and a trend towards a reduction in the overall support of the ANC. And what we have no precedent on in South Africa is how the ruling party of Liberation handles, and I think Chris mentioned, he sort of alluded to that. We don't know how we're going to handle a loss of support for the ruling party, where they are threatened or even where they move into the 50%. In Kenya, we saw a second time round over the course of the last few months how the Kenyans matured to handle a further election. We haven't even gone through one change of a party at an election time.
Well, without
We've got to learn that.
without sounding
The
like a
Zambians did it. The Ghanaians have done it. I think, you know, I think we can do it. The key thing for me is, as the ANC support continues to dwindle, is the DA and other opposition parties gaining the traction for people to say at that crucial point, which I think is 2024, to say, okay, it's moved to elsewhere and the ANC can't do anything about it.
Richard, just two thoughts. Number one, I do think there's, with respect to Chris's point, which might or might not prove to be correct, I think the big difference next year in the election is we're going to have a group of people coming to vote for the first time who don't have all the baggage that we carry, if you're older than 20 years old, from the old South Africa with all its plus and minuses. So to an extent, there is some, I don't know how to play it so well, there is what you might call more of a floating vote with less loyalty than has traditionally been the case. I mean, Manchester United, of course, Sir Alex Ferguson, people support Manchester United since the 19th century, and they still do, because it's got brand loyalty. But if you're younger, you don't necessarily have those allegiances. Some will, some won't. So I think there might be some shift in that new cohort.
We've got to just give Tony Leon a round of applause. Brilliance of getting Manchester United into this debate somehow. I mean, that was a stroke of genius.
Well, look, my 88-year-old father, to talk about tribal loyalty in Durban, has been supporting Manchester United since 1935, and he still does. So attachments are not discarded overnight. That's the point I'm making.
I've offered you one scenario about what happens.
A pessimistic one.
Right, now let me offer you a different version. President Zuma, the root of the problem. President Zuma is actually also the solution. The ANC is the root of the problem. The ANC is also the solution. Because what's happening in the ANC at the moment, I would contend, is a sea change. And that sea change is the old generation, the Madibas, passing on, not yet, hopefully, literally, the Zuma generation, if I can call it that, moving, getting older, the freedom fighters coming to the end of their career, and they're being replaced. And here, think about the National Party in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when the Verwoerdian lair was replaced by the lawyers, the guys like Rolf Meyer. In the ANC, we're seeing that come through now. Guys like Malusi Gigaba, super smart, very impressive. Watch him at state-owned enterprises, public enterprises, very impressive. That 40 to 45-year-old generation coming through.
If they come through...
Where's Cyril Ramaphosa in all of this?
Well, that's a good question. But if they come through... If they come through, how does that alter your prognosis, somewhat catastrophic, post-14?
It puts the ANC in a much stronger position to manage the fight back for that following election, much less paranoia from the old guard, the Stalinists, if I can call them that.
You're not allowed to talk about the fight back in politics.
Tony, when you were the Honourable Ambassador downstream, down route, what's the one question about this country leaders, without being indiscreet and disclosing personal confidential talks, the presidents would ask you about South Africa?
Well, the countries I was in, when they were in the southern tip of South America, were generally kind of stuck in a time warp. So they think still of South Africa as those magic moments of Mandela, Invictus, and the Football World Cup, and all the inconvenient truths that have intruded since then. So they actually, and I need to put this here, they actually look to us with some admiration. And they say, well, you know, how did you do it? How did you manage to... I say, well, yeah, we did it, but there are a few other things have happened. So I would say, but that is at a fairly superficial level. The second tier would ask, and that is people in business, people investing, who actually, you know, companies invest, countries don't invest, or as I say. So the people who actually follow what goes on, they would say, before putting their hard-earned dollars or pesos in this country, they would say, well, who's going to prevail in your country? Is it going to be the people who broadly support the market?
Right.
Or is the people who just simply want to asset grab? And because they come from a region, as I explained, of asset grabbers, they want to know it wasn't going to happen if they came into South Africa. Right. That's broadly the economic question asked.
Justice Marikana, and the latest reports that we hear that things are getting nasty once again. If, and you know, God forbid there is anything akin to a result of what we've seen before, what's the significance of these industrial and this inability to solve these sort of issues, do you think?
Excuse me. I think there's several. For the people in this room, firstly, I think mining investment in South Africa will continue to be under extreme pressure. Remember, just after Marikana, we lost $1.7 billion in just those 2 months in work stoppages. So it's serious. Those people are not going into your shopping centers, into your office blocks. That is part of the reason why Pravin Gordhan, the finance minister, said we're going to grow by 2.7% last year. We actually did 2.5%. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the reaction of government. Unfortunately, President Zuma has used the expression an iron fist to deal with some of these things. I work in a country where we have police dragging people behind police cars and so forth. What does iron fist mean? 34 of our own people were killed by our own police services in 30 minutes. So those are two. I think also for yourselves in business, you need to think about labor relations this year. I think we're going to have serious wildcat strikes, and many, many people are going to be demanding double-digit increases instead of your 8-7%, which many of you are used to over the past 18 years.
No, I agree. I'm concerned on the Labour front, and I think the election. I'm concerned about Labour because we have an election next year, and the unions are going to be extracting whatever they can as part of the alliance demands for the election. I mean, the ANC need the unions as a voting fodder, and the unions will be asking for payback. It's payback time. What we don't know, the COSATU is the major trade union in South Africa, is now splintering. And on the platinum mines, there is now a competing trade union who is the majority trade union. We don't know their particular political agenda or how populist they might be. So there is a divergence of opinion within the ruling alliance at every single level within the ANC alliance. Trade unions, business, socialist state, it's across the board.
So, are we keeping you from something?
I'm interested in a point you made.
Oh, please do.
No. I think one of the key things, if you think about it, Lonmin last year, 22% increase for those workers. The next day, the Transport and Allied Workers Union left negotiations when they were about to sign a 9% increase and said we want the original 14% we demanded. This is going to be the key thing in this wage bargaining season this year. People are going to be demanding way more money, and both sides of the trade union front, whether it's AMCU or it's NUM, they'll be demanding, they want to be more radical than the other. And so that's going to cause a lot of
Let's have some light in the room. You've had a question already. You may be the president for another day, but who's got a question? Now, come on, if you lot haven't got a question on this one, we'll have to go over to the president again.
Till 10:30, number 10.
Anybody want to join in on our debate? Okay, Mr. President, go on. Let me get you a microphone. Can we have a microphone? You talk amongst yourselves. Shouldn't be that difficult with that lot. Right, go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. There's a question for Mr. Tony Leon. Thanks for a very nice address. Why did you accept President Jacob Zuma's offer for you to go to South America?
Well, Dr. Mosneki, let me give you the short version.
Thank God.
You know, Oh, you're always so polite to your panelists. Why you're rating?
Sorry, was my microphone live?
Yeah, okay. You're the only reason I watch CNN. You keep carrying on like this, I'm going to channel surf. Yeah. Okay, switch allegiances. Just to answer Dr. Mosneki's question, I very much believed and practiced that you should have a wall between the party and the state. And when I became the leader of the DP in 1994, in my first meeting with Nelson Mandela, had just become president in May 1994, I used my presidential FaceTime, which, as you know, is the most valuable commodity, to actually say that my predecessor, now passed on, Zach de Beer, should be made an ambassador because he'd had to resign as leader of the party. Anyway, I wasn't doing a job, you know, kind of prospectus for myself 15 years down the line, but anyway. After the 2009 election, when I retired from Parliament, stood down before the leadership, I had an approach from President Zuma to take up another position, I have to say, which is all in the first chapter of my book, which I declined. Listen, you guys are salesmen, I got to sell, we all sell. Anyway.
Are you selling them at a discount?
Well, I don't get the money. There's no business profit in writing a book. You do it for your ego, not for your bank account. It all goes to the publisher, let me tell you something. But the point is, to answer seriously Dr. Mosoniki's question, was that when I did speak to President Zuma, he said to me that it's very important that the face of South Africa overseas doesn't just consist of ANC faces. And that is a viewpoint I profoundly agree with. So I thought, well, can I go and do this job without selling out everything that I stood for? And of course, it had something to do with where I was sent. It was very easy to be the South African ambassador on behalf of all South Africans in the southern cone of South America without selling out your principles. If I'd been made, and I wasn't offered this, the ambassadorship to Tel Aviv or Harare, I might have found myself, you know, severely compromised between what I thought and what the government wanted and what they did. So that's the short answer.
Would you have liked to be the ambassador? I mean, I know it's moot since you weren't, but if you were, would you have liked to have been offered Washington or London?
Well, I just don't think it would have been a comfortable fit. I mean, I would have liked, you know, that residence and all that.
Right.
No, I just think it would have. I genuinely believe in major chancelleries, if you're going to have political ambassadors, and that's another argument altogether, you need to be very aligned to the thinking of the ruling party. There are plenty of other places in the world where your political alignment doesn't interfere with what embassies and ambassadors should do, and they should grow the trade, grow the exports, grow the tourism, promote the country. And I believe whether you're ANC, DA, IFP, ID, everyone can do that and should do that.
Chris, let's talk about this idea of the relationship between government and business again, which is interesting, and what you believe needs to happen in this country in the year or two ahead. Because you're obviously a business expert, a management consultant in your own right, and you edit the Acumen magazine. So what do you think needs to happen?
I disagree with Clem Sunter's suggestion that we need an economic CODESA. We've had all the talk shops, Tony, redoing them. They're all in place, make them work. Well, some will work, some won't. Richard, what needs to happen is for the people in this room to understand the nature of the state in which they are doing business. At every facet of your business, you interact with the state. Business we think of as business and customers, company and customer. In South Africa, it's about the state. And the state is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So how many of you have board members or a chief executive with government relations on your desk? Who thinks strategically about the relationship that you have with this thing called state capitalism, which is what the ANC wants? It's there. It's a reality. And you have to deal with it. You have to get on board with it so that the next time the plane from Johannesburg lands in Buenos Aires, the delegation gets off and both politician and business leader point in the same direction.
Which is exactly, of course, is what people like Cameron, Hollande and Merkel do when they go overseas with a plane full of businessmen and women in the back of them. Sir, a question.
Hi, Richard.
Hello.
I'm Kevin Roman,
Nice
one
to
of the
meet
board
you.
members.
Welcome.
Just, the people themselves. I think what we're not talking about are the people. The fact that there's still high unemployment, 24%, 25%. We've got, you were talking about shacks in your earlier talks and that type of thing, people still living in shacks. And our townships, or previous townships, not becoming suburbs. How's that going to affect the elections? Are the people going to vote, or are they still being put under pressure where we have strong voices leading and people are just following? Are we going to see a change in that, in the opinion of the panel?
David, let's start with you.
Daniel, Richard.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
Sorry.
No wonder you didn't answer.
I've always wanted to correct you on screen and I couldn't, so at least I can do it now.
What was your name again? You won't win this one.
And I am an admirer. I think that what we've seen has been, again, a decline in the overall popularity of Jacob Zuma in urban areas in South Africa. Now, Zuma's approval ratings are at an all-time low over the course of the last 5 or 6 years since he became president. Whether or not this translates into urban voters in particular, either abstaining, as perhaps Chris would suggest, or casting their vote for another party, look, we'll have to wait to see. But I think there is a softer vote for the ANC occurring. It's going to be a less enthusiastic vote. And the fact that opposition parties, to be perfectly honest, haven't really capitalized on a more doubtful ANC voter really is testimony to the unattractiveness, in a sense, of many of the existing opposition parties that there are in South Africa at the moment.
All right.
So I think we're in an interim no man's land of this political sort of malaise. And this is going to continue until such a time, and if I wish to provide another scenario for everybody, until such a time when the ruling party itself mutates and changes. To me, it's not the ANC forever. There are elements of the ANC that will mutate into another political movement over time. We'll have the same personalities back in power, just like Vladimir Putin, who was a good Communist Party apparatchik before, of course, the fall of the Berlin Wall. He has re-emerged and seems to be president for life in the Soviet Union, in Russia.
That's a very pessimistic approach.
I think we are going to see a similar scenario of a mutation of the ruling party over the next 10 to 15 years.
Right. So we've got.
Are you suggesting President Zuma for life? Did I hear that right?
I am suggesting that many of the personalities currently in the leadership of the ANC will simply re-emerge in a different guise over time.
Or maybe suggesting President Putin.
Just to answer that question, a lot of the people of South Africa, in fact, the ANC in the past 2 elections saw a decline in support in every province except KwaZulu-Natal. What's happening is that in KwaZulu-Natal, the IFP is being totally obliterated, and President Zuma has capitalized on that voter base. In my view, the IFP will go to a 1% party next year, and a huge chunk of that vote will go to the ANC. So even though the ANC may be losing in the rest of the country, the ramp of voters that are coming from KwaZulu-Natal is so big that the ANC could well stay above 60%.
All right, going to pause you there because we want to take some more questions. Forgive me.
We had Tony's version of optimism. I'd like to hear what the panelists think in terms of the optimistic picture. I also think that we also need to look at the civil society. The civil society is really fighting hard to ensure that we do not get into, the scenarios that is being played out. And particularly because I'm from the civil society, I think that there is elements of optimism that we need to look at.
All right. Let's just do the optimism one. Chris, you've been very pessimistic.
Oh, I've given you two.
None of them were terribly cheerful.
Sorry?
So let's start with let's have a bit of optimism.
Well, this feeds into my optimistic scenario, which is the late 70s, early 80s, when civil society really started to embrace little movements, all of which led to eventually to the UDM, which led to the change at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. And I think that in movements like Agang, in the Bobby Godsell, James Batlatse Citizens South Africa Initiative, we're starting to see that, and I think you make an absolutely excellent point.
Tony?
Yeah, I agree. And look, civil society is the critical differentiator in our country from many other countries which have civil society. They have to operate underground, have to operate by sending, smuggled photographs through cell phones and so on. We have a lot of space in this country, and how we choose to occupy it will depend whether or not we make the kind of progress that we believe we can make. And I'm absolutely encouraged to hear the response from the audience. And I'm one of the patrons of this Bobby Godsell, James Batlatse Active Citizens. You can dismiss it as high-minded do-goodism, and maybe it is that, but at least it gives people a feeling of ownership of that it's your country. It's not some abstract that just belongs, to the crowd in the ANC elective conference or in Pretoria.
I'm sorry to say, but guys, think about this. We are 140, your statistic, number 143 out of 144 countries in the quality of our science and maths education. We have 25% unemployment. If you include the 2.4 million who have stopped looking for work, that's a 7 million number. How can we be optimistic with those two numbers? It means, one, many of us here are from townships, but how many kids from townships studying maths today are going to make it to matric, and how many will make it into this
Let me push you on through. Are you not seeing any optimism?
Am I not seeing? Oh, no, I'm very optimistic. I think we're going to have
you are?
We're going to have a fantastic...
Thank God, because if that was pessimism, we're in a bad day.
We are just not dealing with the structural issues in this country.
All right.
I don't know how we sleep at night with so many of those kids not getting a maths and science education. They can't count. They won't make it into this
It'll keep me
room.
awake at night. Right. Your question, sir.
Mashilo speaking.
Hello.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
You look shorter in real life.
Oh, look, really?
Yeah.
Did you have a good lunch?
I tried.
You tried?
It didn't give me indigestion though.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Well, there's still time for dinner. Your question, please.
All right, two questions. The first one.
one!
Yeah, I'll come on to it. The first one is, everybody's glorifying the NDP as a good program, but are we creating the institutions that we're creating? Are they building incentives such that things like the ones Justice is talking about, that child who's studying mathematics, incentivized by the policies that are created such that they can continue, irrespective of the challenges that they face, that they do, including business? The political institutions that we have and the economic institutions, are they building those incentives for all South Africans so that we become productive, we become competitive?
Do you think they are?
I don't think so. I think it's the policies that we're creating are just entrenching the elitism between business, and business is doing that. It's entrenching that elitism in the political systems as opposed to creating incentives for people to grow as a country.
Justice Malala, business creating elitism rather than incentives to grow.
I'm sorry, but I don't think it's business's job to make sure that the kid in Hammanskraal, where I come from, actually has a chance in life. That is why I elect my government. That is why I put people in power. For me, I think it's fantastic that I'm sure each and every one of you and your companies have a little maths program and a catch-up program, and you do your bit. That's fantastic. But we have to look at reality in the face. 16.3 million people are on social grants. We shouldn't be happy about this. We should be saying, how many people have we managed to create an atmosphere where they can have the dignity of a job?
Right.
I think
Careful, Chris is moving.
I'm sorry that I'm taking it a bit down.
No, this is Justice standing on the poop deck of the Titanic saying, this shouldn't be happening. I invested in the White Star Line. We got great architects, wonderful maritime designers. There's a spectacularly good captain on the. This should not be happening. Well, it bloody well is happening. And what are you doing about it?
I'm asking them about it.
You want leadership, ladies and gentlemen? You want leadership? Look in the mirror first thing in the morning. That's where leadership comes from.
Well, just one point about the people, the delegates here. There are a lot of guys in this audience who own, manage, and have interest in shopping centers. And as we have consumers with less to spend, as we have fewer people entering the consumer classes, the worse affected the property business is. It's a very fundamental and simple point. So I think everyone has an interest, but Justice is correct. You pay a lot of tax, you give political responsibility. There are certain basic things that government needs to do. And when it does those things well, then it can start intruding on a whole lot of other sectors where currently it's actually operating without attending to its knitting. And someone very high up, I won't mention name, in government made a very interesting point to me just after Marikana, which we were talking about down the road. He said one of the problems with NUM, which was the mine union that was at the center of it and has now lost out there after this terrible event, is that it wasn't, in his words, as high-ups' words, it wasn't looking after its own back garden. It was so busy in the political power plays in the ruling alliance,
Right.
it wasn't worrying about the needs of its members who were in the Amplats. And that is, there's a lesson out of that for all of us, you know, about looking after your constituency, tending to them, looking after your back garden. Sometimes, unfortunately, the back garden is very big. It doesn't just consist...
Ambassador,
Yeah.
I need to pause you for a question.
Thanks. I think firstly what we've got to realize is there's more good in South Africa than bad. I mean, we're a great country. There's been so much good. And we as business has prospered more since '94 than ever we did in our lives. That's what we got to accept. We do have a climate and we are properties. I mean, look at the businesses people say the property sector has never had it so good. Stock market is a high time
Yes,
low.
no speeches, please.
Absolutely. All right. The question is, firstly, I think both Justice and Chris, you've got it wrong. Marikana, you've got to ask a question about the role of Lawnmill. They can sort the problem out in that issue of the union. And in terms of the Gupta Gate, the issue is the government
Is there a
acted.
question here?
The question must be asked is that Minister Jafar Derby said in 7 days you would get the report, and the report has been done, and they have acted. So
Right.
the
So
question
what was
is,
the
I
question?
think the question is both of your analysts are actually just overreacting to two issues which are being attended to.
Have you all overreacted? Daniel?
Are we overreacting? No, I think that, should I sum up, Richard?
Yes, please.
No, I think that everyone here has made valid points on the issues in which they believe. I think we live in an extremely complex country. Perhaps every country is complex, but a particularly extremely complex country given where we've come from and the deep divisions in our society within South Africa. These continue. But, you know, I am optimistic. You know, you're all optimistic. Let me just say one thing. Justice makes a very true point that if you are a young, essentially black school child today, you have been failed by your government over the last 20 years. You have. But I must tell you, if you were a young black child in the prior to 1994, under the old National Party administration, you were also failed by that administration. So
Which you couldn't change in those days.
which you couldn't change or couldn't even discuss openly for that matter. So we are sitting with 40 years, 50 years, 2 generations virtually in South Africa of young people and maybe more maturing people who have largely been failed by 2 successive administrations. And I mean, you've got to take that into account when we look at now a future blueprint for the country, which is the National Development Plan, which we can talk about more broadly. But I think this is the real hope for South Africa. And to me, the cleavage in politics in South Africa will come over whether we can implement aspects of this or not. Right. There's a blueprint. Can we implement it or not? And I'm glad that there's a blueprint, and that gives me hope, at least for something.
Richard, I thought for one moment Daniel was going to spend many minutes debating history and reanalyzing and re-voting on yesterday, to use Tony's phrase. I'm pleased to see you're looking forward, because my question is, what are you doing about it?
No, what...
You're standing on the poop deck of the Titanic. What are you doing about it?
No, I think...
blame the politicians. They've failed. Well, politicians fail all over the world. Get used to it.
I think we're doing a lot about it, and I think part of it from a business perspective is to find areas where we support what government policy that we support. For example, in the National Development Plan, to highlight it, to pry holes in the ruling alliance away from those who don't support it to those who do support it. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity there.
We're going to take some more questions, fast questions. Oh, I need a microphone. Got a microphone. Who's got a microphone? Oh, no, we're down here. This lady at the front. Oh, go on. You're the back.
My view is that, and it's not a question, it's just basically an observation coming out of the business area. Definitely, there are about 2 million small businesses that exist. We have a problem in terms of inequality that we see socioeconomic issues getting away from us. What is business doing about this? To at least make sure that if each of them could employ 1 person, we could create 2 million jobs every time that we decided to take that foot forward.
All right, that's 1 point from you. The lady at the front. Yes.
Thank you so much. My question to everyone on the panel is, are we seeing a government and the private sector that is eager to be part of the global sector? while ignoring that the masses are still not yet prepared to, they're not ready to buy into the dream. We've got a whole lot of people who still don't know how to compete into a change in South Africa. Are we seeing a private sector and a government that is ignoring of the socio-economic factors that are still part of the problem of South Africa, where obviously the people who are the voters are still part of the old democratic order? And like Tony Leon is saying, we're seeing a new breed that is coming, but the one that are still part of the economy, part of the politics, are people who have been left behind by the historical imbalances of the past. So in a way, what we're seeing is a pattern of people who are not yet ready, who are not educated of the practical problems on the ground, but who have been sold the dream of democracy.
So what's the question?
The question is, are we leaving the people on the ground behind by
Are we
getting
leaving
on?
the people on the ground behind?
Well, clearly, just on some of those statistics that come out of the international benchmarks, we are, because we're under-educating, we're underemploying, we're under-servicing. On some others, we're not. I mean, a huge amount of government expenditure, a vast of your taxpayers' money, goes towards poor people rather than rich people. It is redistributive. Now, we can argue, and we will, and perhaps we'll agree, that the mechanisms for delivery are faulty, they're corrupted, they're corroded, they don't get there, but a lot of them do get through. So I think it's a mixed picture. And that's what I would say. And you need to get it more into the good frame and more out of the bad frame, and you've got both in equal measure in this country.
Sir, you get the last question. It had better be brief.
Just quickly,
Just talk.
what concerns me perhaps most is what appears to be an inability or a lack of will to deal with the question of education. We sit at that figure of 143, yet we have a Minister of Education who doesn't seem to be disciplined. Why is there this lack of the inability to accept the weakness in that area and to actually take steps to deal with it? That's my concern.
I'm going to take your question and I'm going to put it into the final question to each of you, bearing in mind that education, as I said yesterday, is the single biggest issue that comes up again and again and again. So I ask each of you as we come to the end, starting with you, Tony, what for you is the biggest single issue in the next 12 months in this country that we can throw back in your face?
Okay, I'm going to deal specifically with that very important point in education and giving you a general answer. It is whether government and society is prepared to stand up for what we can call the national interest rather than a sectional interest. And what you've seen in South Africa and what we see in education incidentally is that one constituency, in this case the very powerful teachers' trade union, is being benefited, and a whole lot of school kids who should actually be getting the education on time are not. Right. And that could apply across the board. So if we do things in the national interest, not the sectional interest, we will be getting towards that fast track.
You get, Justice Malala, the one thing.
The one thing, I think the one thing that everyone keeps talking about, when you ask Tony about would he have been happy with London and DC, actually he should have turned them down. He should have said Beijing. When it comes to Beijing and China in South Africa, we are clear, we are engaged, our business sector is united with government. You look at the BRICS Business Council, that is a model for what you can do with the rest of the country's policies, with the rest of the economy. We are single-minded on that one issue, and it's going to have a big impact on your businesses. China is going to take you over, basically.
Daniel.
Look, related to what Tony and what the questioner said, to me the critical issue is building a capable state in South Africa, improving the efficiency of the bureaucracy and depoliticizing the bureaucracy, full stop.
Chris, you have used the Titanic analogy a couple of times. So, Captain Gibbons, on the poop deck of the good ship Sun City, sail us off into the yonder, please.
Right, learn Mandarin. To pick up on Justice's point, China, very important, but invest in private education. I agree 100% that education is not being dealt with at government level. There are a number of extraordinary ventures in the private sector, low-cost private education. Are your companies engaged with those companies? Are you supporting them? Because if you are, you're investing in the country's future.
And this is no longer the Titanic.
Correct. It's the good ship South Africa. SS South Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, the good ship South Africa.
Thank you very much.
I'm not switching channels.
Right. Oh, hang on. We're back to the Bribery Act. I tell you, we should actually have a competition, Neil. If anyone can guess what's in the box, the winner could get one. Don't. Where are you off to? Oi, 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 oi. Sit down. Sit down. And you. I know where you live. I'll send Justice Malala around there later.